What happens when God takes a simple idea of wanting to talk to other leaders in student ministry and turns it into an entire ministry of its own? On this episode, we're celebrating 10 years of Student Ministry Connection. Let's get ready to connect and grow. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection and happy 10 years. My name is Steve Cullum, and on this episode, I simply want to celebrate with you all and pull back the curtain just a little bit on the history of this podcast. I'll share some thoughts from several of you and also talk about my own memories over the past 10 years. And of course, as I've been hinting at for the last couple episodes, we have some giveaways as well, and we'll get into that at the very end of the episode. But let's start with a little bit of history. I know some of you have been listening to this podcast since the very beginning, which is just crazy. So you may remember back in episode 0 from February of 2016 when I shared a little bit of the vision for all of this. But it really goes back further than that. Back in 2015, I was a student pastor at a church in New Hampshire, a job I absolutely loved. Sure, it was incredibly difficult at times to be at a startup church and to be the one charged with essentially starting a brand new student ministry, but it was also incredibly thrilling, especially to see God grow it over time. And during that time, though, I experienced some loneliness in ministry. I'd moved from the Bible Belt of Illinois, where there was a church on every corner, it seemed, and everyone went to church, or at least were totally okay with you going to church. But in New England, which is statistically the least churched area of the United States, it was very different. So not long after I moved there, I began connecting with anyone I could who also served in student ministry. I eventually was able to help start a few networks of student pastors, and I got involved in leading for National Network of Youth Ministries as a volunteer state coordinator with my friend Aaron Stetson, who has also been on this podcast a couple times. I also started to go to pretty much every student ministry leader event that I could. This involved local trainings and retreats, but also national conferences. And through all this, something began to hit me. It wasn't a huge surprise, but I became very aware that I loved being around other youth leaders. I especially loved to hear their stories and about their ministries. I loved hearing about what God was doing and what they were learning. And I always walked away from those conversations feeling like I could keep talking to them for hours. Around 2014 or 2015, I also started listening to podcasts. Most of the ones I was listening to were based on hobbies of mine, like video games and technology. I'd also been involved in a gaming podcast as well that was run by a friend of mine. So in early 2015, I began thinking about what it would be like to record some of these conversations that I was having with others serving in student ministry and then put them into a podcast for the world to hear. It took me about a year to pray through it and think through it and begin saving for my very first microphone. But in January 2016, I finally recorded my first episode with Aaron Stetson, where we talked about bivocational student ministry, which is still one of our most downloaded episodes. At the time, there were very few student ministry focused podcasts. In fact, I can really only think of one or two others that I knew about at that time. So after praying about it for a while, I finally decided to just simply call it what it was, the Student Ministry Podcast, a name that stuck around until 2022. And as many of you know, God eventually moved me from New Hampshire to Colorado in 2017, and I kept the podcast running. I was able to connect with more and more youth leaders and speakers and authors and even a couple movie producers. It's been incredible to think about all the people God has opened the door for me to have conversations with over the last 10 years. And many of them have been recorded so you can listen in. And listen in you have. What I thought would be something that just a few friends and family listen to has turned into thousands of downloads. I don't even know how to begin thanking you for being a part of this community. This is, of course, all for God, but I am so incredibly thankful that we can have a part of it too. Okay, back to the history. So throughout 2021 and 2022, God had been working on my heart a lot. And this is eventually what led me to join in an NYM full time as a missionary, supporting student ministries around Colorado and around the country. But it also had an effect on this podcast. I'd been wanting to do more for a while, but I didn't want to bite off more than I could chew, so to speak. From the very beginning, I kept the podcast schedule to once a month because that's what I knew I could consistently do. But in early summer 2022, my wife and I began talking about maybe bumping up my release schedule to every other week and also a name change. And after praying and talking with her for about a week or so, I decided to go with a name that, yet again, was exactly what the podcast was all about: Connections. In fact, it's a name that my wife suggested. And so on July 15th, 2022, the Student Ministry podcast became Student Ministry Connection, and we moved to an every other week schedule. I kept the majority of the episodes as interviews, but at this time I also began doing some solo episodes where I shared some of the things that God has taught me over the years, because at that point, I'd been serving in student ministry for about 23 years. And so now here we are on February 5th, 2026, 10 years later to the date of episode 1. And wow, it is so crazy to see where we've come. And again, I am so grateful to God and to you all. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for all 10 years or you showed up somewhere in the middle, thank you so much for your support. And so one of the things that I thought would be fun to do to celebrate this 10-year anniversary was to highlight some of the comments that I've received from you. And I do plan on keeping all of these anonymous, but if you hear your comments and you want to make it known that it was you, please feel free to do so. One person said, "I really enjoy the interviews in this podcast. Steve does a great job of highlighting folks that no one else is talking to. These guests often give awesome wisdom and insight from the trenches of ministry. Keep up the great conversations." Another person said, "This is a podcast from a pastor sitting down and letting other youth pastors talk about where they've been. It's great to see how God is using all these pastors." One person said that one of their favorite episodes is when I spoke with Dave Adamson on digital ministry, and they said they are so inspired by his journey and his willingness to obey God, even when he had a lot of questions. They said they also appreciated the point about answering the questions that students are asked and showing up where they already are on social media. Another person was very thankful for episode 129 about recovering after being fired and said, "I was fired from a well-known church unexpectedly, and it wrecked me. This episode gives me hope. I haven't landed anywhere yet, but I have hope I will." One person shared about episode 109 about starting or rebuilding a student ministry and said, "Great tips. I think our ministry team needs to grow a lot in involving parents." Another one said that the episode on conferences really hit home, as leaders need community too, to grow, get support, and be among like-minded people. And there were several others who simply thanked me for the podcast and said that they regularly recommend it to others they know in student ministry. Thank you so much for all the comments we received. I can't thank you guys enough for all your support, your encouragement, and that you even listen and share this with others. Seriously, thank you so much. And now I just want to share some of my own memories over the last 10 years. But instead of rambling for a while, I decided to make a list. So here are 10 memories from the past 10 years. Before I begin, though, please note that these aren't necessarily the 10 best moments or anything like that. And I've also not ranked these at all. These are simply 10 memories that come to mind as I think about the last 10 years of this podcast. Number 1. The first thing that comes to mind is simply the support that I've had from others. Specifically, I want to call out someone I mentioned earlier. My friend Aaron Stetson was my first guest. He believed in me when this podcast was nothing but a crazy idea that I had, and no one had ever heard an episode. And he's since been on the podcast again, and he's helped facilitate getting several other guests on here as well. Number 2, along those same lines, I have to shout out all my friends from the Download Youth Ministry community. Many of us went to the very first DYM 100 event when my podcast was still in its infancy. And they thought that it was so cool that I have a podcast. And over the years, I've had almost all of them as guests, and they've been incredibly supportive. So shout out to my DYM friends. Number 3, I remember in the early days of this podcast when I received some specific feedback from several of you in the community, which was so incredibly helpful. And one piece of advice that I got was to make the episodes longer. At first, it didn't really make sense to me because I thought people probably didn't have much time and shorter would be better. But I was told that they wanted more time to get to know my guests, which was so incredible to hear. And it's the very reason why that connection piece has become more and more of the focus over the years. Number 4, I remember recording episode 31 back in 2018 where I interviewed my wife. To this day, I record the vast majority of my interviews online. But Yvette and I were in the same room talking to the same Blue Yeti microphone. And while we can normally talk to each other all day long, it was so difficult to record this episode because we kept laughing at ourselves, sitting across from each other, talking to each other, but also trying to talk to people who weren't in the room with us. If you've noticed, she hasn't been back on the podcast yet, but maybe if you encourage her, we can get her back someday. Number 5, I also remember when several of us podcasters would get together after conferences and do recaps together, and we'd share those on all of our different podcast feeds. I don't know how much you all enjoyed those episodes, but they were so much fun for me to talk with other podcasters and feel like I was a part of that community. Number 6, I remember doing these annual programming updates for several years. When I first moved to Colorado, I was leading a larger youth group, and I was asking all these questions about what programming should look like. And I thought maybe others would enjoy hearing what I was learning, and what I was trying, and what worked, and what didn't work. And because you all received those episodes well, I was more okay with recording solo episodes to talk about other things that I've learned over the years. Number 7. I remember being able to introduce the student ministry world to Dan Navarra's Youth Pastor Compensation Survey and Report, which has become an amazing resource for youth leaders as they seek appropriate financial compensation, support, and so much more. Number 8, I remember one specific episode back in 2017 where I forgot to hit the record button. It was 20 minutes into an amazing conversation with a couple youth leaders, and then all of a sudden, I look up and see that the record light is not on. The horror that crossed my mind in that moment was so bad. I quickly stopped my guest mid-sentence and had to break the news to them. Thankfully, they were incredibly gracious and agreed to start back from the top. And also, thankfully, that's been the only time that's happened. And probably because that first time gave me such an anxiety attack that I've been incredibly careful since then to make sure I always hit record. Number 9, over time, I've had other aspiring podcasters ask me for pointers. This is something I never saw coming. I never expected to be any sort of expert in this space, and honestly, I still don't consider myself one. But to think that I've been doing this for 10 years and others want to ask me questions about my experience, that still blows my mind. And number 10, wrapping up, there's one more person I want to mention. In January 2019, it was a huge honor for me to interview my own youth pastor, Tim Mules, for episode 36. It was something I'd been wanting to do for a while, and I finally convinced him to record with me. At that point, he had been at his church for well over 30 years. So we talked about longevity, and he shared several things that helped him get to that point. We talked about doing another episode at some point. But little did I know that Tim would unexpectedly pass from this life later that year. To this day, next to episode 31 with my wife, episode 36 is my most cherished episode. So on episode 50, I dedicated another episode to him, where several of Tim's former students and I shared some memories of him. I know I've said it a lot of times, but thank you. Thank you for taking this journey down memory lane with me. I don't know what that was like for you, but I hope, at the least, it provided some insight on the last 10 years. And maybe and allowed you to connect more with me. After all, this podcast is about connecting. And speaking of connecting, I'd like to connect some of you with some giveaways. We have several items donated by some amazing ministry organizations, and I cannot wait to give them away. So, first giveaway. Download Youth Ministry has generously donated a 1-year subscription to their Youth Ministry University training, which normally costs $249. I am a huge fan of this amazing training that you can use for yourself, but also for your team. If you're unfamiliar with DYM, they have a huge catalog of lessons, games, and resources, all created by youth leaders who have used them in their own ministries, so you know they've been tested in the trenches. I've been using DYM for well over 10 years, and I highly recommend you check them out at downloadyouthministry.com to learn more. And you might even see some games and lessons that I have on there as well. Giveaway number 2. Dare to Share will be hosting their very first Energized Youth Ministry Conference in Denver, Colorado, shout out to Colorado, from April 23rd to 25th, 2026. And they've generously given us a free ticket to give away to one of you to celebrate 10 years of the podcast. The regular ticket price for this event is $299, and you could end up going for free to this 3-day conference designed to renew your energy and transform your ministry. Check out daretoshare.org/energize to learn more about this event, but also be sure to check out everything else that Dare to Share has to offer as you train your students to reach their peers with the gospel. Please note also that this prize does not include any travel or housing expenses. Giveaway number 3. YM360 has so many great resources, and they have generously offered one winner a choice of 3 of their midweek premium series, each priced at $44.99. So this is a $135 total value. Each of these curriculum series include detailed, fully editable large group outlines, discussion guides for after the message, a full suite of editable graphics along with a style guide, themed countdown and bumper videos, parent and volunteer resources, 4 game credits to use in their games library, and all of it is 100% downloadable and adaptable for whatever size or demographic you're in. Check out youthministry360.com to learn more about their midweek curriculum, but also to check out all of the amazing resources they have to offer. And giveaway number 4, National Network of Youth Ministries has generously donated a digital ticket to the Global Leadership Summit for August 6th and 7th, 2026, which is valued at $199. GLS Next Gen is one of NNYM's strategic partners, specifically aiding in our effort to provide professional equipping for every youth leader in the United States. While they offer lots of great training resources, a ticket to their annual summit guarantees you'll get in on the cutting edge of new leadership training. So if you win this, you can attend both days from the comfort of your own home and receive training from some of the top leaders in the world. Check out globalleadership.org to learn more. And in order to get a chance to win, all you need to do is go to the link in the show notes for this episode and then fill out and submit the form by February 24th, 2026. After that, we'll randomly select the winners and contact you using the information you provide. There's nothing you need to purchase to win. You simply need to fill out the form. And do note that you can only enter once per person. There might also be some other giveaways and more fun we'll have on our social media, so be sure to follow us, especially on Instagram, at Student Ministry Connection. And as we get ready to wrap this up, I just want to say thank you again for being here for this 10-year anniversary episode. And no matter if you've been here for all 10 years or you subscribed somewhere along the way, I am so incredibly grateful for you. Please continue sharing this podcast with other student ministry leaders and leave a positive review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help us quite a bit, and it makes the podcast better and better. And if you'd like to support my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries by joining my prayer or my financial partnership team, you can do so at the links in the show notes or also by going to nnym.org/Steve Cullum. This podcast is an extension of my ministry with NNYM. So when you donate, you're joining me in supporting youth leaders like yourself. And if you'd like to book me or someone else for your next youth group event or team training, check out Youth Ministry Hub's Speaker Hub at youthmenhub.com/speakerhub, or you can follow the link in the show notes. And while this might be the end of our 10-year anniversary episode, it is far from the end of this podcast. So be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube so you don't miss future episodes. And you may have noticed that I've been posting more video clips of our episodes lately on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. And so to further celebrate 10 years, I'll be going back in the archives and pulling some clips from past episodes. So if you're not following us on social media, be sure to do that as well. And until next time, be sure to stay connected and may God bless your ministry.